All right, so my name's Carrie Lee. I oversee career services here at Webster University. So today we're going to be talking about managing your job search stress. If you have any questions at any point, please just put those in the chat. We should also have some time at the end for questions as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of some common job search myths, type of questions that people come with, learning a little bit about kind of labor market data, and then some strategies for helping with job search stress. So we won't be talking about actual active job searching, writing your application materials, interviewing, that type of information. So these are some of the most common myths or sort of concerns that a lot of students have about job searching when they're getting ready to, graduate, find full-time employment, things like that. So we'll kind of talk through each of these, but we'll just get into it. So one of the first ones is a lot of students get concerned that, there aren't any jobs out there, like those are filled. If you're kind of graduating and you're just starting your job search, like, are there still opportunities that are going to come up? So really for full-time employment, there is no one time of year in which there are jobs. People leave their jobs at any point during the year. Projects are going well, they need more support, they have extra funding for their department. So there are some particular programs that recruit earlier, like there are some companies that hire people for their kind of like rotational leadership development type programs that they're often moving some of their past interns through that process. So sometimes those might be a little earlier, like more winter time, but that's not going to be most things. Different companies have different fiscal years. So, like their fiscal year might start on January 1st or June 1st or July 1st. And so that's just when they get the budget for their department for that year. So, they might have more money and could hire more people. Their budget might be cut and they might have to think about making cutbacks. So, know that there's no one right or wrong time to graduate and to start looking for jobs. A lot of students also get concerned if they feel like they don't have a lot of experience. So, maybe they didn't have the opportunity to do an internship, they haven't had other types of employment before. And so for the US, obviously it's great to have relevant jobs and work experience, but that is not the only thing employers look at. So they do look at other things like what did you major in? Do you have other experiences, even if they weren't paid? Have you done projects? Have you done research? Were you involved in a student group? Things along those lines. And same thing, it is really hard because a lot of entry level jobs will say, oh, we require X years of experience. And so sometimes it is really easy for new graduates, newer professionals to say, well, I don't feel like I'm qualified for anything. Everything is asking for these skills that I don't have, that they're asking for more experience that I have. And so what I will say is that in this current day and age, there are definitely roles that are entry level salary or an entry point to a career that are not, in fact, entry level jobs. Even if they might be coded that way on a job board, because it might be, oh, we want 5 years of experience in this field because that's what you need to be eligible for this management position or something. For others, really, it is just uncommon that you're going to see a job posting that says, we don't require any experience. You don't need anything in particular. And honestly, part of that is just because it's gatekeeping. So, if they say, well, you don't need any experience to work at a tier one help desk job, then sometimes people will apply who really don't have any business. And so they don't mean that you're an English major with no expertise in IT or computer science. They mean, oh, sure, you might have a computer science degree and no work experience, and you would be eligible for this IT job. So sometimes they're not always firm qualifications. They just put in qualifications to kind of keep people from applying who maybe really have no business doing so. So what I would personally recommend is kind of that 70% rule. So if you feel like there's a good chunk of the qualifications that you're meeting, or maybe you're meeting kind of those required qualifications, like you'll have your bachelor's degree, and so maybe you don't have a year of experience, but you're meeting those, that's preferred, not required, or you're meeting a good chunk of them, go ahead and apply. You never know who else is in the candidate pool. Some things may be firm from an employer and some things may not be. They may say, well, we like you the most out of this candidate pool. Nobody has every qualification that we're looking for, so we're willing to be flexible on this point or that point. So don't feel like you don't have any experience, or that nothing is out there. If they're requiring a year or two and you don't have, more full-time experience yet, go ahead and apply to that. Don't waste your time applying to a job that requires 5+ years of experience if you don't have that. But, if you had 3 years of experience, that's much more workable. And again, you can talk about things that you learned in your courses, your projects, your other type of volunteer involvement, those things beyond just relevant work experience. Sometimes people get really concerned because they feel like they sent out their applications, they're not hearing anything back. If you don't hear something right away, it means they don't like you, that you don't have any consideration. Just know that time to hire is taking longer and longer. So like over the past 5-10 years, it's just a lot slower than it used to be. So if there is a close date, like if a job is posted and it says it's going to close on May 5th, they may not even look at applications until it closes because they may just go through all of the candidates at once. Some people will go through candidates, as they come in, kind of periodically check because maybe they don't have a specific posted deadline on the role. But you never know how they're doing it from the back end. So just because you applied to a job and you didn't hear back in a couple of days, that doesn't necessarily have any bearing, because it's not uncommon that somebody might reach out to you in a week or two or a month later. So, there's kind of some typical norms. Like, yes, if nobody has reached out to you for 3 months, obviously that's probably a soft no, but there's always sometimes some employers that just are incredibly slow. So, don't lose hope if you're not hearing back right away. Similarly, most students these days are not going to graduate with job offers. Um, Even for students who did internships, they've been applying for things. It is very rare for people to have something lined up actually before they graduate. So 3 to 6 months is a very typical time frame for a professional job search. So, if you kind of started applying to jobs, if you're going to be a new grad, if you're just getting started with this process now as you're wrapping up school, um, or, you're in a role, you're looking for something new, know that it is typical for things to take a while, because by the time an employer posts a job, they go through candidates, they do probably a couple of rounds of interviews, they do a background check or reference check, offer you the job, and give you time to actually get started in the job, right? That's very common that that's going to take a month, 2 months, something along that time frame. And again, in this day and age, sometimes it's hard when it feels like you're having to apply to more jobs than people did in the past. There's people who are using AI or sending out a lot of automated applications and things. So, there is a certain amount of, you have to apply to be considered. And so probably applying to, 5 jobs is not going to be enough to get you that job offer unless you have very specific qualifications and you're applying to very specific jobs. But you do want to find that balance between quantity and quality, because if you're just clicking easy apply and that's it on any random job and you're applying to 500 jobs, that's not necessarily the best approach. Versus if you're actually applying to things that would be a good fit, that you're meeting, a good chunk of the qualifications for, even if not everything, that's probably going to go much further along in the process. So there's no one right number of jobs to apply to, but I was going to say it's going to be a little bit different if you're an international student reality is probably you're going to have to apply to more jobs than domestic because, again, not every employer is as open sometimes. And then kind of the last job myths that come up is that, if you have some perfectly, created resume, it's getting 100% on an ATS tracker, checker, that will get you the job. And the reality is there's no such thing as a perfect resume. Resumes should always be dynamic. They're always going to be changing throughout your career. If you're applying to different types of jobs, you should have slightly different versions of your resumes. And the goal is really to get you an interview because you want to make sure that you have enough information on your resume that people understand that you have some relevant skills or knowledge or experience. But, you cannot fit your entire life onto 1 or 2 pages. So things like making sure your resume is very consistently formatted, it's readable, that is very important. But, a lot of companies use applicant tracking systems. So things like Workday or ADP or Greenhouse, and they all are slightly different, right? All the systems have different capabilities. There are some commonalities that they don't like graphics or tables on your resume or a bunch of columns, but they're all a little different. So there's no one perfect format or system. And then kind of again, with just as people tend to apply to more jobs than they used to, that this idea that no one reads cover letters. And it is very dependent, I would say, on the particular hiring manager, on the industry, because there are some that very much still value cover letters. And so they care a lot. And then there are people that really don't care, and everyone in between. So if they are requesting a cover letter, that is your opportunity to show them that you are really interested in that role at that organization and how you would be a good fit. If you are doing a career change, for instance, that can sometimes be a really good opportunity to craft that narrative to say, this is why I'm so excited to go into this industry. Not why are you no longer want to work in this other one, but why are you excited about this opportunity? So if you are a good writer, it's optional. You really like this would be an ideal opportunity for you. It can still be worthwhile to include a cover letter. You may not include a cover letter for every application. That's totally fine, but it can help you stand out because if you're just sending very generic cover letters because they're asking for them or just to say you're doing it, or you're using AI to just generate something generic, yes, that's not going to do much for you at the end of the day, but there is sometimes still an opportunity to use those. So moving into kind of the job outlook, current labor market. So I know this is a lot of text, but just kind of as a reference point. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a government agency. They do a lot of tracking of job statistics, unemployment across the country. And so as of last month, because that's the most recent data, the unemployment rate is 4.3%. So just as context, it has gone up slightly, but a fraction of a percentage since last year. You can see in April 2020, it was almost 15%. It was closer to 6% in May 2021. So obviously that was a much tougher market. So even if it feels like a more challenging job market than a year or two ago, it's not necessarily anything to that level. And just in terms of like overall employment, so they kind of have different classifications. So like non-agriculture jobs, there were 178,000, new roles in March 2026. It is down from the year before, but not as egregious as some other points in recent years. So healthcare, construction, transportation, and warehousing were the industries that had those bigger job postings in the last month. A lot of industries had very little change, and then a little bit of a decrease in more of that federal government employment, finance and insurance industries. Hourly wages have gone up a little bit since last year. So the average right now is $37 about. Know that that is an average, right? So there are people with a lot of experience, management roles, entry level roles. So just as a sense of what's typical. The National Association of Colleges Employers does a lot of surveys with employers who tend to hire more new graduates. So this is kind of just feeling out. They always kind of ask them several months in advance. So, in the fall, they reached out and said, how do you feel like the job market is going? Are you planning to hire more people than last year, less? So, they're not as optimistic this year. But as you can see, again, kind of that recent history, there's been some changes, but still not as poorly rated as it was in that 2020, 2021 academic year. And so NACE, the organization I just mentioned, and then the American Association of Colleges and Universities, had kind of similar employer surveys where, again, they asked them, what makes the difference? Like if you're hiring newer professionals and they're kind of equally qualified, they have the same degree, what makes that difference to you? And so there's always things that change a little from year to year, but as you can see, the most ideal situation is if they completed an internship with their organization because that means they already trained them, they've had exposure to them, so they know what they're like on the job, they know their work ethic. But most people don't have that, right? That's very unusual. So if you have had any internship experience in your industry, if you have a relevant major, if you just have any work experience, so if you've had customer service experience, and it's not necessarily related to your major, that still matters to them, right? You still have things to talk about. They see that you have, work ethic. If you've had leadership experience, so if you were involved in involvement groups on campus or volunteering. So, things like your GPA, it does matter for some companies. They might have different cutoffs as a way to narrow their candidate pools, but that's not the main concern. They are looking at a variety of experiences. And so, similarly with the AACNU survey on the left, so they were kind of interesting because they broke down by the age of the employer. So employer representatives that were 50 and above, and then under 40. And so you can see things like if they've ever had any type of work experience before, right? That is very highly ranked as something as desirable. But then other things they view differently. So you can see that for some younger hiring managers, they care a lot about projects. They care if you've had leadership roles. It's a little different rankings for some of those older managers. So just know too that there is no one set ideal about anything because every hiring manager is going to come in with their own preferences, their own biases. Again, sometimes depending on their age level, if you're a younger hiring manager, you probably have a sense of what the current market was like for you when you were entering your career. So again, they may value slightly different things. And again, just to kind of reiterate on this point, transferable skills are those skills that are applicable to different types of jobs, different types of roles. So, having customer service skills is very important whether you're working at Target or you're working at a bank, right? Those are things that are applicable across things. If you have good organizational skills, if you have good attention to detail, teamwork, all of those things. So again, you can see that these are all very highly ranked by employers. And so it doesn't mean that you should just write the word teamwork on your resume, because that's not necessarily the most impactful. But if you can incorporate that, like if you were involved in a student organization on campus and you can say, oh, you were a member of a 40-person club and you put on, these events every year, or you collaborated with this group to work on this app that you all developed for your programming class, right? So you can kind of embed these skills into the experiences on your resume that you have. And you can see that there is kind of this gap. So a lot of kind of times newer professionals, they rank themselves a little bit more highly on these skills than employers do. And so we don't know the exact reason, but I think a portion of this has kind of been speculated that sometimes you know that you have these skills, but you may not be able to articulate that to employers. So you might know that, yes, you have really good critical thinking skills. You've had a bunch of very like writing intensive classes, things like that. Um, um, but if you're not communicating that to the employer in an interview and you're saying, oh, yeah, a time when I had to do a really complex project was when I did my thesis for my history major and I had to do this type of research and these processes or analyze this type of data, and you're helping communicate that to them. So that is a lot of it, is just how can you show that you have these skills? So as I mentioned kind of at the beginning, for a lot of job postings, they kind of separate out the qualifications. So they will often have sections to say this is required that you have X level of degree, or maybe how many years of experience, or you have experience with this software program. And then what are preferred? So, the preferreds are the nice to have. It's great if you meet some of those, but don't be discouraged from applying if you don't meet all those preferred qualifications, because again, not every candidate pool is going to have everyone who meets those qualifications. Sometimes it may just be a decision to say, well, no one is perfect, or we thought we had a perfect candidate and they're not willing to work for this salary, and we don't have more in the budget to hire them. So we have to be a little bit flexible with some of these and, figure out who we think is going to be the best fit. So again, if there's stuff that seems very straightforward, like they're saying that they will not hire someone who needs sponsorship in the future and you're an international student, then yeah, probably don't waste your time with that. If they're asking for way more experience than you have, but if it's closer, as I said, go ahead and apply. So in terms of kind of typical timelines, as I said, it's very common to take a few months. So, don't be discouraged if you're not hearing back right away. This was from last year, so a survey of Indeed job seekers, that about half of people heard back from employers within a couple of weeks. About a third heard back within 1 week, and 4% heard back within a day. So if you are ever getting something from employers right after you apply and they say, great, we'd love to set up with an interview with you, that's obviously a really great sign. That's not typical. And to not panic if it is taking you kind of a week or two or three. And then the National Association of Colleges and Employers, they kind of have tracked the last several years of going from that first interview to actually getting a job offer. And so they generally had, 23 and a half days in 2019, and that has shifted to 27. So that is almost a full month. So again, just because you interviewed and you don't hear back about next steps for a week or two, doesn't necessarily mean that things won't happen. So at the end of the day, you can only control what you can control. The job search process is stressful. That's just a reality for most people. I don't think most people really enjoy this as a process. And so don't tie your self-esteem or your confidence level to the outcome, because you can be literally the perfect candidate and you don't get the job. And it might be because, the candidate they hired is friends with somebody at the company, or their parent is a high level manager there. If they went to that university, if they went to had done an internship with that company before. So know that you can do every single thing right. And that doesn't always mean that things work out the way you want to. So the things that you can control are things like your applications. So, you can't necessarily change overnight how much experience you have, but you can change how you're communicating about it. Are you making it really clear what you have done and what skills you do have? You can try networking and reaching out to people. Again, you can't control whether they're responding to you, but if you're making an effort, you're going to have a little bit more sphere of influence than people who aren't doing that. For your interview, are you preparing? So do you have kind of typical answers for questions? Do you have questions to ask the employer? Things like that. Um, Things like, can you learn from rejection? Probably everyone has had an experience where you had a job interview and you just weren't expecting the type of questions they ask you. And you said, wow, I really did not feel prepared for that. I didn't realize from the job posting that it looks like they were looking for something very different than I thought. That's okay. Those are learning experiences. And so, think about how could you have answered that better? If you didn't have a good answer for a question, think about what you could do to have a better answer the next time that question might come up to you. Think about how can you learn new skills? If everyone keeps asking about you and your experience with this software program, this type of process, and you don't really have anything to say, well, maybe you do some kind of projects. Maybe you do a LinkedIn learning course about that topic. So then you have something to talk about, right? And you never know how things will work out in the future. There are definitely opportunities where, they hired someone or they made an offer to someone and then that person didn't work out. They quit after a month or 3 months, or they didn't agree to the salary because it was, you know, not what they were expecting. So there are absolutely situations where they will go back to past candidates and they may not say, well, yeah, we tried to hire somebody else and our first choice didn't work out and you're our second choice. But that is not uncommon. So if you have made a good impression or they say, we want to thank you for your time. We've chosen to move forward with hiring someone else. It really doesn't hurt anything to you if it actually seems like a human sending you the message and not just like a system and an automated message or something that you can say, thank you. I appreciated getting to know you all. If you have other questions down the road, let me know or something. Because you're just leaving things in a good place. If maybe another position pops up, something happens. And you just want to think about how can you sort of set manageable goals and expectations. It's okay to change things. Sometimes as you're applying to jobs, you might get to the point where you're like, well, it's been X amount of time and I really just need a job. Maybe I'm going to start to be a little bit less picky about things because I'm not getting interviews, I'm not getting callbacks to these type of roles that are a little bit more ideal for me. Maybe it's something that's not quite as degree related, but I just need income because I'm supporting myself, and that's sometimes what you have to do. So, know that sometimes, obviously, like the job market changes. You may figure out as you get more experience, you like doing certain types of tasks more, what's a good fit for your strengths. So it's okay, know that a first job is just that. It's just a first job. It doesn't mean you have to stay in that job forever. I think while you do want to make good choices and not accept things that you're not going to be happy with or that don't work for you, there's also a lot less stigma about changing jobs. You're not going to probably be in one job for 5 or 10 years. So some of you may already be familiar with the SMART goals process. It's very common in the business world as well. So all it stands for is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant or realistic, depending on which version you look at, and then time bound. So what this means is that if you're setting a goal for yourself and you say, okay, I'm graduating, I want to look for this type of job. be specific. If you just say, I'm looking for a business job, that's a ton of jobs, right? So are you looking more focused at marketing types of roles? Are you looking more at accounting, at finance jobs? You know, it can be more than one thing, but just try to be a little bit more specific. You know, is this something that's measurable? If you say, well, I realize that a lot of places are asking for more experience with data analysis, or they're asking for experience with Power BI, and I should get better at that. If you just say, well, I want to get better at doing data analysis using Power BI, what does better look like? You know, does that mean that you could do a certain level of analysis? Does that mean that you feel more confident about it, that you know these kind of basic features? So, you know, kind of try to think, how can you actually measure if you do actually improve at something? Is this achievable? You know, most people aren't going to be CEO 5 years after they graduate from college unless you decide to open up your own company, right? So, does this feel realistic? Is it relevant? So, you know, is there a way to kind of tie this back? So, doesn't mean you have to stay in the same career field that your degree was in, but does this kind of flow make sense with your interests? And is it time bound? You know, so if you kind of set smaller goals for yourself to say, okay, here's what I want to get done in the next month. You know, I want to make sure that my resume is updated. I want to apply to X many jobs by this date, right? So you're kind of giving yourself a time frame. Another kind of goal setting framework that is called WOOP. So that just stands for Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. And so this is kind of like, what is that ideal? So if you really want to get into, you know, a human resources role, that's the kind of wish, as it were. So what would that outcome look like? You know, that maybe it would be like an HR coordinator, an HR specialist type of job. What are potential obstacles that might come up? So maybe you haven't had prior experience in that area. Maybe you're very location bound. What are those challenges that you're kind of thinking about? And then how can you plan to overcome those? Because, you know, you want to be optimistic, but the more that you're kind of proactively thinking ahead to say, okay, you know, I don't have as much experience in this area. So, what are other things I can do to make myself more competitive? So, maybe leaning more on the networking side of things and getting to know people who work in that industry and talking to them and learning about what other skills I can lean on, improve on. And, you know, I really recommend just figure out what works for you and kind of your organizational process. Everybody is a little bit different, but if you have some type of systematic process for how you're saving your resumes, you know, where you're applying for jobs, if you're kind of taking notes as you're doing interviews, um, for some job boards, you can see those past job postings that you applied to. For other ones, they will disappear when they're closed. So whether it was a particular date closure or maybe they had a certain number of candidates and then they closed the job posting. So I would always recommend just like saving it as a PDF in a folder. Because then if you get an interview and you're like, wait, which job was this? I don't remember what they were asking for in the job description, then you can go back to that and that will help you prepare. You know, if you're saving all of your files and you're like, final resume, final resume, it gets very confusing down the road, right? So, you know, save it with the date and the title, save it by the type of role. So if you're like Carrie Lee, financial analyst, or, you know, marketing, then you're helping yourself kind of do better for future. Um, Also, if you're having interviews, jot down some notes in whatever format works for you. So if you're like, oh, these are the types of questions they asked me, this is kind of what I thought was challenging, I maybe didn't have a great answer for. You know, if you have all of that saved up, that cuts down on future prep time. Because the next time you have an interview, you can just go back to those notes and say, great, okay, these are the questions I ask. I feel like I have some examples to talk about, I have something to share. So, you don't have to write out the full question or your full written response, but if you have good examples or a project you're really proud of, just kind of jot down some notes, bullet points, and then you're just saving yourself future work. Same thing, depending kind of on how many you're applying to. Sometimes it's helpful just to get a sense of, okay, I applied on this date and this was about how long it took to get back to me. Because sometimes, again, that might help you feel a little bit better or just have a better sense of, for the times I did get an interview, they mostly reached out to me about 2 weeks after I applied, so that can kind of help give you a sense of normalcy as well. And, avoid comparisons. A lot of people, will post things on LinkedIn or social media, or when you're talking to people, they're always going to present a more polished version of themselves in public, right? If they have a job and they're excited and they're announcing that, it doesn't mean that it's a perfect job, right? However enthused they sound about it, it might have been like, well, yeah, it wasn't their first choice, but it's a job in their field. And so you don't know all the things that kind of go on behind the scenes. Um, Everyone experiences challenges in their career. It doesn't matter how wonderful you are. A certain percentage of the population is going to go through a layoff at some point, right? That you lose your job for no reason of your own, or you get fired because, it really was not a good fit. So every job is going to have pros and cons. Um, and just be kind to yourself at the end of the day, because I think for some people they're just a lot harder on themselves than other people. So if you're like, wow, I haven't been able to get a job and I don't know, am I not good enough? Are these skills not enough? Is there something wrong with the way I'm communicating about myself? Know that again, you can be doing everything right. There might be things for you to improve, but it doesn't mean that that is impacting your value as a person, or that you would ever think those things about your friend if they're also having a hard time finding a job, right? And, don't catastrophize. So if you think, okay, well, it's June and I haven't gotten a job offer yet. So that means that I'm, not going to have a job by this point and I'm not going to have any money. And then suddenly, oh, I'm going to be homeless and not have anywhere to live. Right. So don't go down those spirals of here's this step 15 steps later, and this is a worst case scenario. Think about how important is this actually? Maybe you didn't do your best in an interview, you felt slightly awkward communicating with somebody. Is this really going to matter down the road? Right? Is it going to matter in 5 days from now, in 5 weeks from now, in 5 years from now? Are you even going to remember this one random conversation or interview that wasn't your best? Probably not, right? That's probably not going to follow you around forever. And, if the worst did happen, how would you handle it? There's a lot of spectrum between, yeah, maybe you don't get your perfect job as that first job post degree, but you certainly could get other types of experiences, other types of jobs. So, don't kind of overgeneralize and live in this very black and white world of, well, I didn't get this job and I thought it went really well. And so that means that I'm not qualified or they don't like me, right? That's just one situation. Don't generalize that to nobody is going to like you or nobody thinks you have good qualifications, because I mean, even for me, I've had experiences where clearly, the interviewer was looking for something very different. Like they had a very different personality type. It maybe didn't have anything to do with your qualifications, but you realize, hey, it's just not the right fit. So all you can do is make the best decisions you can with the information that's available. Sometimes you find things out when you start a job and you realize that maybe your supervisor has a little different style than you management wise. Maybe that you didn't realize this part of the job would take more time than you were thinking, and that's your least favorite part of the job. And some stuff you're just never going to know. You cannot know everything about every job before you start it. So you just have to make the best choices you can. And take a break as you need that. like I said, job searching is a stressful experience. And so make sure that, you have healthy ways to channel your stress. So, talk to your friends and family. If you have hobbies, try to get some sleep. Like, make sure that you are still having a schedule because, especially if there's no particular time deadline or sensitivity, it's really easy to get kind of in this state where you're maybe a little bit anxious about it. And so you just don't do anything and you just put it all off. Or that's all you're doing is just getting anxious and thinking about it all the time. And you're always thinking about job searching and what else should I be doing. So, you know yourself the best and what works for you, but try to maybe have some time set aside. So if you know that you're the type of person where you're like, okay, I'm going to spend this amount of time this morning, looking at jobs, applying for things, or I'm going to reach out to a couple of contacts on LinkedIn. And then I feel like I've done enough for that day and I can move on and I can do something fun, right? That you're not just thinking about it all the time, or you say, you know what, Fridays are my day that I do a bunch of work because I work my part-time job other days or something. So whatever it is that works for you, you know, just try to kind of schedule things as you can. So, if you do feel really overwhelmed, again, don't feel like that's anything unusual. We have a lot of information on our connections pages. So if you go to the Career Planning Development Center page, we have information about resume writing and job searching and interviewing and all kinds of different resources. We have other past webinars, kind of a random selection on our YouTube channel. There's also kind of other mental health resources. So if you feel like you're getting really anxious and like this is beyond your usual, or maybe you're feeling anxious about other things in your life as well. If you're a current student, obviously, you can connect with the counseling and life development on campus. Together All is kind of more peer support. There's crisis hotlines. If you're out of Webster, there's different other things as well. So if you're looking, for therapists, if you have an employer, sometimes there are things that are kind of subsidized through like an employee assistance program. So just know that there are resources and support out there. There are sometimes like job search support groups from more community-based resources. So not necessarily out of my office, but there are sometimes ones for different populations. So that might be something to look at too, if you feel like that would be helpful for you, or if you have a friend that's graduating and you're like, okay, you know what, we're going to get together and check in every week. And that's going to help us stay motivated, or talking through that kind of stress with somebody. So, don't give up. It only takes one yes. You only have to get one job offer, right? And just, think about what can you learn from your experiences, whether good or bad. Sometimes if you have a not so great experience with an interview or application process, you just know that that's not what you have to do, right? If you say, well, I thought this person was kind of rude and they were late to the interview and they weren't communicating well, then you know that that probably is not a great place to work, right? If that's the way people are operating there. So sometimes those negative experiences are just as helpful as the positive ones. And just think about, what is most important to you at the end of the day. Everyone values different things. So maybe you value, salary the most. Maybe you value having a flexible schedule, that you feel like your work is meaningful and you get to contribute to the community in some way. So, everyone is probably going to have to make some compromises. So if you go in knowing what is most important to you, that will help you as you're kind of going through that process to say, okay, is this an offer I want to accept? These are the type of roles I'm interested in, things like that. So I will go ahead and stop the recording.